This every day live, weekdays, Monday through Friday, live from Los Angeles from noon to about 2 o'clock Eastern time. Every day, live, weekdays. If you're just joining us for the first time, we appreciate your patronage. And we got a huge show for you today. We're going to be covering topics that you may have heard about, but we're going to go much deeper and in an entertaining way. Because if it's not entertaining, I don't want to do it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to watch it. We're going to get to it, the good stuff. And we're going to start with Jim Callis of MLB Network, MLB Pipeline. And so we're going to talk about the Nationals and the Astros, but we're going to give you a deep dive behind those teams, right? The prospects, where they came from, what to expect in the series, and what to look at going forward with the future of those teams. What are the other teams in Major League Baseball that we may see in the World Series next year? And what teams could be on the decline in terms of talent behind the scenes? Jim Callis. Now, you think about Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, those kinds of guys for the NFL draft. Is there a baseball guy? Yes, Jim Callis. He's the draft expert in baseball. We got him on this show. Huge get today. That's coming up in just a minute or two. All right. Also coming up, Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated, regular friend of the show and the lead college football national writer for college football on Sports Illustrated. And he's going to talk to us about a story that he broke earlier this week. Huge story. Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback of Alabama, having surgery again. And it's the same surgery as last year when he injured his ankle. So they're hoping, of course, Alabama plays a high school team on Saturday, University of Arkansas. Then they have a bye. Then LSU, the biggest game, biggest regular season game on the college football schedule. If LSU's got to get through Auburn on Saturday. So that's not going to be easy. We'll see what happens there. But if all things continue in the direction that they're going, the biggest game on the calendar, on the schedule in college football until we get into the championship games is going to be November 9th between LSU and Alabama. Will Tua be at 100%? Had surgery on, I believe, Sunday morning after he suffered a high ankle sprain against Tennessee on Saturday, Tuscaloosa. So it was Ross Dellinger who broke that story, gave us the details of this innovative surgery. It's called a tightrope surgery. And so it played out well for Alabama last year. Tua was ready to go. Of course, he didn't finish the game. Jalen Hurts came in and saved the game for Alabama against Georgia in the SEC title game. Hurts now at Oklahoma. Amazing story. But Tua, we'll see what happens. We'll get the insight on what his condition is going to likely be against LSU. That's coming up later in the show. Bram Weinstein will join us, another friend of the show. He is one of the leading voices on DC sports on ESPN 630, the Sports Capital, which is the big sports radio station in DC. Just did a big launch, Tony Kornheiser's station, I might add. And so Bram Weinstein, for obvious reasons, will join us from DC as, of course, the World Series shifting back to DC starting tomorrow, Game 3. A lot of people seem to think that it's in the bag for the Nationals. I don't know why they would think that, but I guess based on the first two games and the nature of those matchups and the pitchers that the Astros had going, it really has been a remarkable stretch. It's been unbelievable. And when you consider how long it has been in DC when it comes to baseball, it's, I guess you could say, overdue. So we'll talk to Bram Weinstein about that. Plus, we'll talk to him about the game tonight in the NFL, the Skins and the Vikings, and we'll try to sift through the dumpster. You might have to hold your nose, literally, as we're going through what's going on. You know what the Redskins are like? They're like, have you ever done this where you accidentally throw something out? One time I accidentally threw my phone out, believe it or not. And it went into the trash, and I did it down a chute, an apartment building. So it went into the dumpster. So I had to go down to where the dumpster is at the bottom of my apartment building, looking for my cell phone of all things, right? And it was turned off, of course. So you can't just call it and find out, locate. So it goes into the dumpster, right? And this relates to the Redskins because this is what it's like trying to find out what's going on with the Redskins right now. But so I had to get a chair and I'm standing above the dumpster looking down, and you're going to lean in. Or am I actually going to get into the dumpster, start stomping around? Yes, that's what happened. And you know what ends up happening in those situations? There's always one guy, and a guy like me, who doesn't empty out the liquid out of a cup, right? Whatever it is, whatever that, God-foreseen liquid is. But there's always that guy who just, some old coffee, I'll just 3/4 full, I'll still throw it out, right? And so as you're going through the trash, trying to find, whatever, your birth certificate or something, your diploma or your phone like me, you always run into that where you have some sort of rotten eggs, got to hold your, that's like talking about the Redskins going into the dumpster. And then there's somebody who threw out hard-boiled eggs like 2.5 weeks ago. Right. And you're okay. All right. Now we got to climb into the dumpster. Jesus. Why can't it just be on top of everything? Right. Whatever I just threw out. So, and before too long, that dumpster is going to be emptied out, but it may take a while. So we'll talk to Bram Weinstein about that. Then we'll have breaking news for you. Darren Heitner, huge news, actually. Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. He's the guy that said, don't monkey it up. Remember that? Before the election, the governor's election a while ago in the state of Florida, but a very influential Republican in the state. He has endorsed the bill that would pay college athletes for their name or likeness endorsements, right? And if that law goes into effect in Florida, it would start July 1, 2020, not 2023 like the California law. And initially, it looked like it wasn't going to go through the Florida legislature. That was the early read that we got on this new bill that would go into effect in 2020 if it went through, and we heard it wouldn't. But now we get the Republican governor endorsing it. That's a game changer. We're going to talk to the author of that bill coming up, Darren Heitner, who helped to author that bill, an attorney, along with Chip LaMarca, the state senator from Broward County. So we'll talk about that later on in the show. But first, I want to talk some baseball with my old college roommate, Jim Callis from the University of Georgia. Went to school with him back in the late 50s. No, it wasn't that long ago. But Jim Callis from MLB Network, MLB Pipeline, and he's Jim Callis MLB on Twitter. Will join us here momentarily. Also, we'll get into some other issues. We're going to talk about the Sports Illustrated story as it pertains to the Astros. We'll get into the situation surrounding Rob Drake, the Major League Baseball umpire. But first, I want to talk some baseball specifically with Jim. How you doing, Jim? I appreciate it, man.
I'm doing good, Brooks. How are you doing?
I am doing great. And I first want to get your thoughts, just your first blush reaction to what's happened, the extraordinary events in these first two games of the series.
Yeah, I mean, the Astros were the, I think, most heavily favored team to win the World Series since 2007. If you look at various metrics, I mean, really one of the best teams in baseball history in terms of regular season performance. And the Nationals, obviously were 19-31, 2 months into the season, looked like they were headed nowhere. And, obviously Astros, great team. You've got Garrett Cole, you've got Justin Verlander. And I think people might have forgotten, though, that, Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg are pretty good, too. And they did just well enough to win. The first game could have gone either way, and then the second game they pulled away late. And it'll be interesting. I don't think the Astros are dead, but they're certainly on life support.
My thought on this is, if there was ever a situation where you could have a complete reversal, might this be it?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking last night, I'm out here in Arizona at the Arizona Fall League and was keeping an eye on the game while I was watching a Fall League game. I remember back in 1978, I think it was, the Dodgers beat the Yankees in the first two games of the World Series. And it looked like, okay, Dodgers are going to roll, and the Yankees won the next four games. So, yeah, I mean, momentum, you could discuss how much it really means in baseball. But if the Astros win game three, all of a sudden then, the Nationals are thinking, hey, if we don't win game four, it's tied. So I don't think the series is over by any means. And I do think the Astros are a great team. It'll be interesting. Zach Greinke's been knocked around the playoffs a little bit. Patrick Corbin's certainly a good pitcher too. And the Nationals are just playing really, really well right now.
Lest you think, we're talking to Jim Callis of MLB Network, MLB Pipeline. Lest you think I forgot, you're a longtime Boston Red Sox fan, but you grew up right outside of Washington, D.C., Jim. And so I would be remiss if I didn't, first of all, ask you, are you a Nationals? I don't know why I haven't never asked you this question, but are you a Nationals fan? I mean, just what's your response as someone who grew up in DC, a Red Sox fan? You didn't have a team in DC at that time to root for. What's going through your mind here? Are you conflicted? What's happening?
No, I mean, it's weird. The Nationals aren't really my team because they really come into being until I think it was 2005. And I haven't really, lived in the D.C. area since I graduated from college in 1988. So, I mean, when I grew up, our closest team was the Orioles, who were about an hour and a half away, and we'd watch Orioles games on Channel 2. I mean, there were no Nationals. So by the time the Nationals came into being, I'd already moved to North Carolina. At that point, I'd lived in Chicago for 8 years. So, no, not really a Nationals fan, but it is kind of interesting. Both my mom and my dad mentioned to me this week, like they have a little bit of Nationals fever, and neither one's a particularly big baseball fan. But, I guess the Washington area, they're on their third franchise now, but hasn't won a World Series since 1924 and hadn't been in the World Series since 1933. And, I mean, it's kind of amazing if you go back and look at the wild card game. I mean, they were 2 innings away from being eliminated. They were 2 innings away from being eliminated against the Dodgers. And here they are on a tremendous roll.
Visiting with Jim Callis of MLB Network, and you wrote a very interesting piece about the background of the talent of these two teams. Give us an idea, first of all, as you go through the prospects in this story, what I'm really interested in, let's start with the Nationals. If there was one guy that you could point to and what his role has been with that franchise, who is as responsible as anybody for them being in the series in the situation they're in, who would be that guy, and what has he done for that franchise?
I guess I would say Juan Soto. I mean, you could go with a bunch of guys, but I would say Juan Soto. And the interesting thing with Juan Soto, Brooks, when you and I were in college back in Reed Hall, our tiny room in Reed Hall, corner suite at Reed Hall.
No air conditioning. No air conditioning at Georgia.
Don't need that, Georgia. But anyway, we were both prospect aficionados, and back then, I mean, there really wasn't a lot of prospect coverage. I mean, there was Baseball America, which I went to work for, and maybe Street and Smith's in spring training, and that was about it. And now there's a ton of prospect hype, and it's kind of amazing, as great as Juan Soto is, that he flew under the radar a little bit, and it was almost by accident, because he was a big-time guy, Brooks, when the Nationals signed him out of the Dominican in 2015. He got $1.5 million. That was a franchise record for international player. They'd had their international department been racked by a fraud scandal and kind of shut down for a while. So anyway, they invested in him. A lot of times when you sign players internationally, they stay in the Dominican Summer League, so you don't put too much on them at first. He came straight to America for his pro debut in 2016. He was MVP of the Gulf Coast League. And so you're like, okay, hype train's starting to build on this guy. And he went out the next year and he broke his ankle. So he barely played. He actually was hitting really well in low class A for about 3-4 weeks, and he broke his ankle. So like people just kind of forgot, he wasn't getting any hype. And then the next year's 2018, and he starts in A ball, tears it up for 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, well, we'll send him to high A, tears it up for 2 or 3 weeks, send him to double A for a week, and all of a sudden he's in the big leagues at age 19. And since then, he's been, pretty much put up numbers that nobody at his age has put up in the major leagues at age 19 and 20. And it's funny, you look at guys like, say, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who obviously got a lot of hype, and even Wander Franco, a kind of similar path in the Rays system, was the number one prospect of baseball right now. But Juan Soto really flew under the radar because of that injury, and then all of a sudden arrives in the big leagues, and he's pretty much a superstar from day one.
It is amazing, and I saw you retweeted this on your timeline, a shot of the Nationals Academy in the Dominican Republic. What is that, and how prevalent is that around the majors?
Yeah, most teams, have an academy. When you sign, players in Latin America and primarily the Dominican Republic, a lot of these guys are 16 years old. They can't begin their pro careers officially until they're 17. And even before you sign them, you work them out in your academy. So they have academies with dorms, and they house and feed, and a lot of teams educate the players in English and things like that. And then when they play in the Dominican Summer League, they're living at the academy too. And so it was kind of a cool shot. And they did one again last night too. But in game one, there was a shot, I think Johnny DePuglia, who's one of the international guys with the Nationals, put out there, and MLB retweeted, right before Juan Soto hit his home run off of Garrett Cole. You had this crowd of really young, Nationals prospects. They're all wearing like T-shirts with numbers on the back, and they just go crazy when Juan Soto hits a home run off Garrett Cole. And again, they had the clip last night, and I don't remember. It must have been during the big rally later in the game, but the same thing, like these 15, 16, 17-year-old Nationals prospects in the Dominican were very, very excited to see, especially Juan Soto delivering.
Visiting with Jim Callis of MLB Network, he's their lead draft analyst. Let's talk about the Astros now, and specifically, I wanted to ask you. There's been some speculation, they might end up not retaining Garrett Cole. That's a possibility. What do you think about the future of this franchise, the health of the talent base that's there? What's kind of underneath the surface of the Astros? Is this a team that's going to continue on at this rate, or maybe starting to decline? What are your thoughts on that?
It'll be interesting to see what they do in the offseason, because this is a team that's been at the forefront of a lot of innovation in terms of developing players. They've done a lot of nice things. Obviously, they won a World Series 2 years ago. They have a great team this year. They had a great team last year. They got derailed in the ALCS. I thought it was interesting. You and I used to talk about this all the time, Brooks. Baseball teams make money. They make money hand over fist. Maybe not, in terms of how the accountants lay it all out for tax purposes, but they make money hand over fist. And I thought it was interesting when before the playoffs started, Jim Crane said something to the effect like, "Oh, they might not pursue Garrett Cole," which I thought was kind of odd timing. Like, why would you say that going into the playoffs? Right. But for all the Astros have done, their team's starting to get a little bit older. They traded a lot of their best prospects to get Zach Greinke this year. They've promoted a lot of their best prospects to the big leagues. The two main guys they have who aren't fully integrated are Kyle Tucker, who's on the World Series roster, and they have a pitcher named Forrest Whitley, who's one of the best pitching prospects in baseball. But you look at that rotation. It's tremendous at the front of the rotation with Verlander and Garrett Cole and Zach Greinke. But those guys are getting old. Garrett Cole's a free agent. I actually think it's kind of imperative for them to re-sign Garrett Cole. I don't know if that'll actually happen to kind of, because I think they're going to be hurting a little bit rotation-wise if they don't. But it'll be interesting because they're all in, which they should be, to try to win while they have this window. But these guys are starting to get more expensive. Guys like, George Springer are going to start to cost more money. Alex Bregman's going to be eligible for arbitration soon and cost more money. Carlos Correa at some point is going to need a long-term contract. And these guys, they get much more expensive once once they get to arbitration and free agency. So I think the Astros will still be good for a while. I don't know if they're going to be dominant if they don't re-sign Garrett Cole. And if they're going to impose some kind of limit on their payroll, whatever that number is, it's going to lead to some tough decisions in the next couple of years.
What are your personal thoughts, and maybe you've heard from other people, about Justin Verlander, in the postseason? We know that record in the World Series and compared to the regular season, but just watching him, what are your thoughts about him right now?
I think some of that stuff kind of gets overblown a little bit. I think he's winless now in 6 World Series starts, since ERA is over 5.
Right.
But there've been he pitched. I thought he pitched well last night until the 7th inning. Suzuki hits a home run off him. We're talking about. There's stories out there. There's one metric that has, I think, the Astros is the best offense of all time, second only to the 1927 Yankees. Well, if that offense comes out and scores more than 2 runs last night, Verlander wins. I know there was a couple times with the Tigers where he pitched close games. I think he even lost like a 2-0 game. So it's not like, the ERA can be a little misleading. I understand. It's the narrative. We went through this last year with David Price. David Price had a worse postseason record. He pitched some good games and been on the wrong side of winning. And then he came through. We hear with Clayton Kershaw, and it came again. And he probably shouldn't have been in the game pitching to Rendon, and Juan Soto. So, I think Justin Verlander's first ballot Hall of Famer, had a great season this year. Either Garrett Cole be the MVP, and be the Cy Young Award winner. And I don't think I don't buy into this, oh, the moment gets too big or he doesn't perform as well in the World Series. I mean, the thing is, when you look at postseason performance for any of these guys, you also have to realize it's a totally different game in the postseason than the regular season. You're not playing, the Baltimore Orioles, you're not seeing lineups that have like one good hitter. You're seeing deep lineups. So it's a totally different game. Verlander's pitched well at the ALCS and the division series level too. I just think it's more of a fluke than anything.
Visiting with Jim Callis of MLB Network. Before I ask you, I want to ask you about a couple of other teams, but what's your prediction on the series?
I had the Astros in 7 coming in. I thought the Nationals would give them a better series than most people thought, just because, again, the Astros do have the better team, but you have Scherzer and Strasburg and Patrick Corbin are a pretty good 3-man rotation too. I think I'd have to switch it now. I mean, I'd say Nationals in 6, which means I'll probably be wrong and we'll see the Astros win. But I'd say, you have to go with the Nationals, I think, now because, again, this isn't a fluke. I mean, they have – Anthony Rendon, I think, and Juan Soto maybe don't get national attention like some of these other guys because they hadn't been on the postseason stage really or in big moments, but they're 2 of the best players in baseball and they have a great pitching staff, at least, the front 3 starters.
Now, I said I was going to mention a couple of other teams, but I really want you to assess, if anybody recognizes and can understand what I'm going to ask you, it's you. And that is, if there's a team to watch next year, it might be on the radar, it might not be on the radar when it comes to behind the scenes talent that's just starting to be realized at this moment. What would that team be where you'd be buying stock on them?
It would be the San Diego Padres. And
wow.
They jumped to mind. I mean, now I'm not saying the Padres are going to win the World Series next year, but they have a very deep farm system. We've already seen some of those guys get to the big leagues. Most notably this year, Fernando Tatis Jr. is going to be a superstar. Chris Paddock's a very good pitcher. But it's also true that you see these teams have great farm systems, and they often surprise you and contend even a year earlier than expected. We saw it with the Astros in 2015. We saw it with the Cubs in 2015. They both went on to win World Series. We saw it with the Brewers a couple years ago, and they've continued to win. And I think we could see it with the Padres. I think in a couple of years, they're going to be a force. They've got guys like Mackenzie Gore is, in my mind, the best pitching prospect in baseball. He'll be up pretty soon. They've just got depth offensively, defensively. They've got the depth to go out and make trades. I think this is going to be a team that's going to be a force to be reckoned with. The only thing that I don't know, scary isn't the right word, but the Dodgers are very formidable and obviously have more financial resources, and the Dodgers have a great farm system too. The Dodgers aren't going away, and the Diamondbacks are sneaky good too. But I really think in a couple of years, we may see the Padres go on a run where they make the playoffs, 3 or 4 years in a row.
Wow. So what about the other side of the ledger? What about a team you could see start to go into decline, maybe fall off a cliff because the talent foundation isn't necessarily there? Or that you have concerns about, teams that you would have major concerns about right now?
Well, I don't know if I'd say major concern, but the team that would be interesting to look at, and it's a team that, and I thought so too, we all thought was going to win multiple championships. The Cubs are interesting because Cubs are getting older. The Cubs are getting to the point where, like I was talking about with the Astros, they're going to have to start paying guys because they're going to be eligible for arbitration and free agency. This Chris Bryant service time grievance is very interesting to me. And I don't know if he can win it necessarily because the Cubs didn't violate any rules. They just took advantage of the rules that the union agreed to. But it was a sham to claim, oh, Chris Bryant's not ready, and we'll call him up literally the first day we can call him up without making him eligible for free agency a year earlier than we have to. But anyway, Chris Bryant's going to have to get paid. Javi Baez is going to have to be paid. And they don't have a lot of pitching. Their pitching depth is very shaky, and they don't have a lot of pitching in the system. So that's a team that's going to have to, go out and you could go out and buy pitching, but it's very expensive. It's hard to trade for pitching, and they just don't have the depth they used to have. I mean, they famously traded Gleyber Torres for Aroldis Chapman that helped them win a World Series. They traded Eloy Jimenez and Dylan Cease to get Jose Quintana. Had a good contract to bolster their rotation while their window was open. But it's hard looking at the Cubs even 2-3 years from now and trying to figure out, okay, what's their rotation going to look like? Because I don't think it's many guys who are currently in the organization. Jim
Callis, MLB Network, got to ask you about the Red Sox because it's been kind of a soap opera sort of playing out right now with Dombrowski and the departure, the direction of that organization. John Henry is now like this mythic figure who you don't really see around all that often. things have changed with the Red Sox organization. I mean, assess that organization, the state of the Boston Red Sox in your mind right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's another team. You heard comments of, oh, you hear it a lot. They might have to trade Mookie Betts. They can't afford him, which to me is crazy in that market. I mean, Mookie Betts is, one of the, 5 or 10 best players in baseball, and you win with superstars. Like, even if you have to pay Mookie Betts $35 million a year, you're coming out ahead in terms of what it gives you on the field. I know they want to reset the luxury tax, threshold, which has become, essentially de facto salary cap that the teams impose on themselves. The union, I think, has themselves to blame for that as well. It'll be interesting. I mean, the timing of Dombrowski's firing was very odd. I didn't think they handled it very well by basically not really coming out to explain it and leaving Alex Cora holding the bag. That's not the manager's job. They've got kind of a four-headed GM right now. It sounds like, from what I've read, and I don't cover the Red Sox directly, at the major league level, I think they want to refresh the culture they had. That was built by Theo Epstein and Ben Cherington, and Dave Dombrowski was kind of a different mindset, and they had people leave for other jobs. And I think they want to kind of hold on to the people they have and refresh the culture they had that led to 4 World Series championships. The team is expensive. They're at a crossroads. They're going to need pitching. They've got some very expensive pitching contracts that didn't look good this year. Chris Sale is going to start making a lot of money, and he was hurt. David Price is making a lot of money. JD Martinez could opt out, which would leave a hole in the offense. So there's a lot of questions there for Boston. I still think, they have resources just about as much as anybody. Their farm system, again, like they went through what the Cubs did, where you got a bunch of guys to the big leagues. They have a very homegrown team that won that last championship, but they aren't as deep as they used to be. There is some talent in there, but they're going through a lot right now. The Yankees are better positioned at the moment. And the Yankees have more resources, and you can't sleep on the Rays, have a very good farm system. They don't have resources, but they have a lot of young talent. And even the Blue Jays have some interesting young talent too. So I don't think the Red Sox are going away, but it's going to be a dogfight in that division. Everybody but the Orioles, has some hope for the future.
Outstanding stuff. I can't thank you enough. Thanks a lot for jumping on, Jim. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, glad to catch up with you, Brooks, and we'll do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, that's Jim Callis of MLB Network, MLB Pipeline. And as I said before, if you wonder who is the Mel Kiper, who is the Todd McShay of Major League Baseball, well, you just heard him. It's Jim Callis. You just watched him. And these are the kind of people that we get on every single day. If you're new to the show and you've just downloaded us onto your phone or your tablet, welcome into Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We're here every weekday, noon to about 2 o'clock Eastern time. We got a lot of guests coming up that we're going to throw at you, not only today, but tomorrow, as we're going to be covering everything that's going on, at least that matters, not necessarily stuff that's being covered on the networks, on Embrace Debate. No phony stage discussions here, right? This is the real thing. And coming up, we're going to be talking to the real deal in Ross Dellinger, Sports Illustrated, #1 college football writer at Sports Illustrated, national guy. Get the lowdown on Tua and his surgery. It's, of course, Alabama getting ready for LSU on November 9th, the biggest game on the schedule in college football this season, period. I want to talk about the college football playoff as we go along on this show as well, because I think it's starting to firm up, starting to shape up, where we're starting to get an idea of who may be in outside of the SEC and from inside the SEC as well. But first, let's go out to visit with Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated and talk about some of the issues I just discussed, along with other things, not just the SEC, some of the things that he's been covering this week and throughout the year. We've got some interesting games coming up. LSU against Auburn. You've got Ohio State against Wisconsin. Penn State against Michigan State. That could be more interesting than people think. So let's bring him up, Cam, when you get the opportunity. Notre Dame and Michigan. That's another interesting game that's coming up this Saturday. So we've got some games on the schedule that I think could have some ramifications. But Ross, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, sure, Brooks.
So I want to get in, first of all, to something that you really broke. You were out front on, and something that happened last year, and it's the surgery involving Tua. I'm not so sure everybody recognizes and realizes what's happened to Tua happened in that game against Tennessee Saturday. So lay out what happened to him and what you've been reporting about his status.
Yeah, well, it goes back to last year. He sprained his ankle last season in the SEC championship game, as we all remember, and Jalen Hurts had to come in and save the day for Alabama. And after that game, he had what's called a tightrope surgery on his ankle, and then he was able to come back, about 28, 29 days later to participate in the college football playoff. So at that time, heading into the national championship game, I kind of did a story on his first ankle surgery with the tightrope. And I went back and kind of revisited it now that he's having surgery on the other ankle, the same kind of surgery. And the surgery is it's a little different. Usually with an ankle sprain, there was normally two methods to approach it. You either give it rest and rehabilitation, and maybe you'll be back in 2, 3, 4 weeks. Depending on how bad it is. If it's real severe, you do a surgery, and they put 2 screws in the ankle, and they basically it's like a 2x4. The screws pull the 2 bones together like this, because this ankle sprain, they get loose. Well, the 2 screws come together like this. And what tightrope is, instead of using the screws, they use basically fishing wire, and they pull it through both the bones, and it comes together like that. And it's quicker to recover from. You don't have to go back in. With the screws, you got to go back in. You got to pull them out. So there's a second surgery involved. It's just harder on the ankle. So the tightrope is a fishing wire. You don't have to go back to get any kind of wire out. There's no second surgery. And within about 10 days, players can run. It's really incredible. And within about 14 days, they can be back practicing, and within certainly 18 to 20, they can play. I mean, they've had players play within 10 days before. So it's incredible. And Tua has, I think, 20 days from the time of the surgery on Sunday to the LSU game. More than enough time, given the history of this surgery, for him to return.
Boy, that's a huge one, because that's arguably the biggest game on the schedule this year in college football. Talking to Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated. But what about Arkansas? I recognize you're looking at one of the worst teams in the Power Five, certainly. What's the quarterback situation for Alabama right now going into that game?
Well, I mean, they did get a break. You gotta imagine they feel pretty good about how this all happened. They get a second half against Tennessee, one of the worst teams in the league, and then they get Arkansas the next game, one of the worst teams in the league, and then they get a bye week before.
Right.
So if this was going to happen at any point, this would be a pretty good time for it to happen. So I think Mac Jones will be starting, it sounds like, and Tua's brother, Talia, will be his backup. I mean, it's Arkansas. I think that Alabama can get away probably with their second string quarterback starting against Arkansas. However, in years past, I would have said maybe Alabama could get away with having their starting quarterback out against LSU. But I don't know about this year. This is the old Alabama teams, the old LSU games were these defensive grudge matches where if you scored more than 24, 27 points, you won the game. That doesn't seem like it's going to be the case this year. And I think they need Tua to beat LSU, plain and simple. They probably need a good Tua, healthy Tua, to beat LSU. So this is going to be a different type of LSU Alabama game than we've seen in the past, and they need their starting quarterback.
Visiting with Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated, you had an interesting article this week about the Illinois kicker. Illinois, of course, with the big victory, the huge upset win over Wisconsin. This, of course, last Saturday. But give us a little background on the guy who won that game and what is arguably the biggest upset of the year, because it's a phenomenal story.
Yeah. I knew that he was from Ireland originally, so I thought this is going to be kind of a cool story. So he's an Irish-born kid, moved to the U.S. with his family at age 8. Started kicking a rugby ball back in Dublin, and that ended up, transferring to him kicking a football in the U.S. and went to St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale, one of the big national powerhouses, and was late on the recruiting trail. He didn't start for his high school until his senior year, and he didn't start at Illinois now until his fourth year. He's a redshirt junior. So patience was a big thing with him. And I think a lot of kids would have left, and he thought about transferring from Illinois, but he hung in there. But he's got a cool story. It's kind of the American dream. He in a way it is. He came over from Ireland. His family came over for their dad's job. It was supposed to be just a 2-year thing in the U.S., and it became, a 15-year thing. And now they're on the path to getting. They came over on a work visa, then they got their green card. Now they're on the path to getting citizenship. So it's pretty cool. He'll eventually probably be an American citizen. And they go back to Ireland. They still have very Irish roots.
Wow.
The family loves a good Irish whiskey and Bailey's Irish cream and Guinness. So it's a cool story. It was cool to talk to some of his family members and some of his people around him.
Visiting with Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated. Also, with gambling and betting slowly getting to the point where it's now really a way of life. I think a story that you've been documenting and writing on this week involving an LSU season ticket holder is something that we're going to see more and more of as we go along through football and really all sports. But give us a little background on Matt Porter and his dilemma right now as that LSU season ticket holder, what he's dealing with.
Yeah, he's he placed a $50 bet in June on Joe Burrow to win the Heisman, and here we are this week, and Joe Burrow is the Heisman favorite. He stands to win. He took it at 200-1 odds. So he's
200-1.
200-1. He stands to win $10,000 on a $50 bet. The issue is, the dilemma for him is that his bookie, his sports book, is offering him to cash out right now for about $3,500. So he can cash out now. He can risk it for double or almost triple the amount. And so he's having a little bit of a dilemma. And it's interesting because we talked about Tua's ankle. I mean, that's a whole part of this. Tua, it was Tua and Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields. It's kind of a 4-horse race right now. And for a while, I think Tua and Joe the last couple of weeks were 1-2, and now with Tua's ankle, it hurts a lot. So I think he's going to keep it through this week, through the Auburn game, but then LSU gets Alabama, and he might, if it's 6,000 plus to cash out with, I think before the Alabama game, he might do it because the history of LSU quarterbacks in Alabama recently are not good at all. In fact, some of the numbers just are shocking. They've thrown so LSU's lost 8 straight games to Alabama, and in those games, LSU's starting quarterback has thrown for less than 52% completion percentage, is averaging about 130 yards passing a game, has thrown eight interceptions to 4 touchdowns, and has gotten sacked 29 times. So it has been not good numbers. So I'm sure he's looking at those numbers thinking it's probably time to cash out before Alabama. Of course, they got to get through Auburn first. That'll be a big one this weekend.
And that's something I want to talk about in a second. But I also want to talk about something, and I've got an opinion on this, that we saw from the athletic director of the University of Florida this week. Scott Strickland came out and tweeted an invitation for other schools to contact him, Power 5 schools, about scheduling the University of Florida. Now, my thought on that is this is gratuitous grandstanding. I mean, what, cell phones don't work in Gainesville, Florida? I mean, if you're serious about making a deal to do a home and home, you would think this might not be the way to do it if you're serious. But what are your thoughts about that? Why do you think
it's
he did
unique? It? I've talked to some of the ADs, and Scott Strickland included, about how they use Twitter for their jobs, and it's interesting because they'll communicate with fans. They'll find out about things that are in the stadium, maybe during a game. Greg Byrne told me a story about the toilets being clogged at one Alabama game. He only knew about it because he was getting tweets about it. So they communicate, they get their message out. It does help them a lot. The ADs are starting to use Twitter more and more. What Scott did was certainly unusual, but maybe we'll start seeing it more. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't have the cell phone numbers of all the ADs, and he just thought, let me throw this out there. Maybe we'll see it more because it's certainly getting some pretty good interaction. But Twitter is something that ADs use, and it's only going to expand, I think, in the way they use it. And Scott has certainly done that for sure.
I think you struck upon the reason he did it. And Greg Byrne, of course, is the athletic director at the University of Alabama, as high a profile and athletic director, and you referenced him, as there is in the country. And you talked about the interaction that he had with fans, just about toilets getting clogged up in the stadium, right? I think this might be related to Scott Strickland hearing from people. Maybe it's Florida fans, maybe reading things in the media that might be, because, there's been a little controversy involving Florida scheduling UCF, some of the locations of where games are being played, some of the in-state rivals that they're dealing with. Do you think this could be a reflection of him kind of trying to set the record straight on what he's trying to do there, and that he is serious about it?
Yeah, it could be. It could be like, see, I'm trying, look,
Right.
I'm trying publicly now. So that could be part of it. They've struck some pretty good deals. I know they've struck a Miami home and home. They struck, I think, something with Colorado, maybe. They've got a couple others, maybe with another Western team. But they've struck a few. We're starting to see this now in college football, because I think everybody is seeing with the playoff, how to kind of organize your schedule. And teams that don't have a very good schedule are kind of getting, in a way, kind of getting penalized. And so everybody's trying to find that Power 5 team. And the thing about Florida is they already have an extra one. They play Florida State every year. So that non-conference, of their 4 games, one of them was always going to be, of their 4 non-conference games, one of them is always going to be a Power 5 with Florida State. And now they're trying to get another one to play 10. And I think a lot of that has to do with several other conferences play 9 conference games, and they play a 10th Power 5 in the non-conference. So the SEC, a lot of SEC teams are trying to get to that point to maybe kind of level the playing field a little bit. I think it's great, for college football. So the Iowa State athletic director replied to Scott Strickland's tweet with kind of a snarky reply about, hey, we already played 10 Power 5s because we played 9 conference games. So that was interesting. For sure, it's certainly caused a little bit of a stir, and absolutely makes Scott look good for at least trying.
Visiting with Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated, when you look at the potential now for the college football playoff, it may be playing out a little different, because it certainly appears that Clemson, Oklahoma, and Ohio State are odds-on favorites, at least in my mind, to go undefeated. I think there's a very good chance based on the competition that we've seen. Now, Penn State could represent a stumbling block for Ohio State. But so you have, and maybe who knows with Oklahoma, there could be something out there. But Clemson, it looks like they're going to run the table. So with that in mind, you might not necessarily see that second team coming out of the SEC. And of course, you've got Georgia and Florida over there. What are your thoughts about Georgia and Florida right now? Is there a possibility that we could be seeing a changing of the guard in that division, with Florida starting to ascend past Georgia?
Maybe, obviously what we saw out of Georgia against South Carolina, and what we saw from Georgia's offense against Kentucky too. I know it was a kind of a slop fest down there in the rain, but it is not good. They're obviously having some offensive struggles in Athens, and they've got to get better. They remind me of some of these old maybe LSU teams under Les Miles' last few years. They just they're kind of old school, and they get sometimes in a rut and they can't score, and that's a problem because Florida can score. We saw it against LSU. We saw it several times this year. Kyle Trask he's got an arm and he's pretty accurate, and he's been looking good. He can make some strikes down the field. So maybe we're seeing a changing of the guard there. It'll be nice to have some new blood there in Atlanta. Since the last couple of years, to have Florida kind of representing the East a little bit. But I agree with you. Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Clemson feel like they're going to be there, in the playoff, and it's just the other slot's going to be probably the SEC champion, unless something crazy happens in the Pac-12. One-loss Pac-12 champion can sneak in, but that's hard to see happening.
Yeah.
But it does appear to be. It's either probably going to be, I would guess, LSU or Alabama, and then Ohio State, Oklahoma, or Clemson. Now, if one of those three slip, though, Ohio State, Oklahoma, or Clemson, you could have the loser of the Alabama-LSU game, a one-loss loser who doesn't make the championship game, squeak in maybe even over a one-loss Pac-12 champion or a one-loss champion from any of those other three we're talking about. So it does feel like we're kind of closing the gap to 5 to 7 teams right now.
It does, and so when you look at this schedule coming up on Saturday, to me the most intriguing game out there, and I think one of the more intriguing teams that are among the competitive teams right now at the near elite level is Auburn. And so I wonder what your thoughts are going into this game, Auburn and LSU. Is this going to be a competitive game in the second half?
I think so. And I think Auburn's got probably the best front that LSU's seen so far. Some people will say they got the best defense all around. I think Florida, has an argument that they are the best defense, maybe the best defense in the SEC. But Auburn's probably got the best front. So it's going to be a real challenge. We're going to just see just how good that LSU offensive line is. If they can keep guys off of Joe Burrow. But even under pressure, Burrow has been incredible this year. It's amazing. So we'll see, how clean his pocket is and how that'll be a big test going into Alabama, because LSU's going to face a similar front at Alabama. So it'll be a test, and I do think it's going to be a more fourth quarter game.
Boy, there was a big development in terms of recruiting that has happened recently, with LSU landing a 5-star tight end recruit over Alabama this week. Do you think this is a one-off situation where LSU gets into a position where they're ascending past Alabama? Is this a one-off situation, or could this start to be a trend where Coach O is starting to encroach on that long-time recruiting dominance that Alabama has enjoyed under Saban?
Man, I've never seen so much hype over a tight end recruit, man. I've never seen a tight end, because it was all over my Twitter feed last night. I mean, blowing up, all these fans going crazy. I'll tell you this, LSU's offense and what they're doing offensively is certainly going to draw recruits. It's certainly going to draw offensive recruits like a tight end, receivers, quarterback. Right now, I saw The Athletic had tweeted out a list of LSU's wide receiver commits, and it's like 4 receivers in the top 400 overall of players. So probably in the top 50 at their position. That's pretty good. So they're obviously getting the guys partly because of the offensive system they're running. I think that's helping, and maybe that does move Ed Orgeron and the Tigers closer, at least to that topping Alabama or topping Georgia when it comes to signing day.
Talked to Scott Russell of Football Scoop down in Baton Rouge yesterday, and he mentioned Joe Brady and that LSU is already obviously starting to look at the future of Joe Brady with that university. Where do you think Joe Brady is going to be in terms of compensation, security, contract? Is that something that's going to be coming up here shortly with LSU, or are we just going to continue to play it by ear with him?
Well, it probably won't happen until after the season. I would assume that they know they have to pay him. They're gonna have to pay him. And but I wonder if with Joe it might not be all about money. He spent a couple years with the Saints in the NFL, and so they're not going to only have to fight off some college teams. They're going to have to probably fight off maybe some NFL teams. And as we all know, in the NFL, you don't have to recruit, and that's a huge perk. So it'll be interesting to watch. There's certainly going to be suitors, and LSU knows they'll have to come with that briefcase full of $1+ million, I'm sure.
Man, if I'm Jim Harbaugh right now, I'm doing whatever I have to do. I mean, I would think Joe Brady has got to be one of the most wanted men in football right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm sure everybody is around the nation. And here's the thing. I don't know if he's going to probably leave LSU for another college job. That would be hard for me, especially knowing how much they're going to pay him. I doubt that happens. I mean, it could. I doubt it. However, him leaving for a pro job, that's something that I'm sure they're concerned about. Interesting.
Ross, I can't thank you enough for jumping on. Outstanding job this week. Great stuff.
Thanks, Brooks.
That's Ross Dellinger, Sports Illustrated, national college football writer, and you get the lowdown there. We're getting everything at you as far as college football is concerned on a national basis. And Auburn and LSU, here's the thing. When you watch these games, all I'm asking for is can we be competitive in the fourth quarter? Can I have something to watch? Or do I just have to be there in the first half to actually see some interesting football? Because that's the way it goes in college football, it seems like these days, is you can't get a competitive game in the second half, very rarely. And then when you get that, you've got coaches who are so unaccustomed to having competitive games that they S the bed. And that's Kirby Smart. That's Nick Saban to a certain extent. That's Gus Malzahn when Auburn played at Florida. What a disaster that was. So, but I'm fascinated to see. I'm still trying to figure Bo Nix out. Look, he's a freshman. It's just like Daniel Jones. You look at all these quarterbacks in the NFL. Let me just tell you, this is something that people aren't saying. I don't hear people say this. You know, the first year NFL quarterbacks, that's kind of in vogue right now. We've got a lot of guys that don't have a lot of experience. The idea that a Kyler Murray or a Daniel Jones is going to take you to the playoffs or is going to really improve that situation with your team in the first year that guy's playing, right? As a rookie, forget about it. It's stunning to me, especially the response of Daniel Jones people after the Buccaneers game, as if this, I mean, just look at Sam Darnold. It's hard enough for him, you know, and he's not a rookie. So I think everybody really needs to pump the brakes on these first year quarterbacks. And I know we've got to have that hype machine. We got to get on that hype train, but it's absurd to expect guys in their first year in a system at the NFL level. I mean, Bo Nix, I think, is kind of analogous to that at Auburn. You're talking about a true freshman, 18-year-old who got lucky against Oregon when he threw that jump ball up on the last play of the game, and lucky that Mario Cristobal, the coach of Oregon, S the bed. You know, Oregon, number one, should never have scheduled that game. Now, to an extent, I understand. Well, I take that back because the Pac-12 is so bad. And Auburn, well, it was a winnable game. They should have won that game, the Ducks. But they would be, had they won that game, they would be right there in the conversation with Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Clemson. And I mentioned this to Ross, and this is something I wanted to address, and I'm going to get to our other subjects here in a bit. And we're going to be talking to Bram Weinstein coming up in Washington, D.C., talk more about the Nationals, storylines there, Redskins, and then Darren Heitner later on to talk about the groundbreaking situation that could be taking place in Florida in college sports. So stay tuned for that. But I just wanted to bring this up real quick because it's a little bit different than what we've been seeing. Clemson, Oklahoma, and Ohio State. I think of those three teams that are undefeated right now. I mean, can you really see Ohio State losing to Penn State November 23rd? I can't. No way they're going to lose to Michigan. No chance. Wisconsin, after losing to Illinois. Illinois, by the way, I think is a team to watch. And before last Saturday, I mean, you'd laugh your ass off if I said that, right? But I really think that they've got some talent there. Lovie Smith has something. Put it this way. If you're not following college football, right, and you see Northwestern out there, okay, which is this representative team and divisional winner last year and comes and goes, but at times they can be a good team. Illinois is much better than Northwestern. Of course, they're going to play. We'll find out on the field in terms of score. But if you just look at Northwestern against Ohio State, and I know it's Ohio State, but Northwestern is just inept. Basic execution. And Illinois, when they were in a position to win, if they executed, the Illini did it perfectly. I mean, if you look at the last 5 minutes of that game against Wisconsin, phenomenal execution for a team that everybody had given up on, for a team with an awful record, but that had played well against Michigan, especially in the second half the week before, 2 weeks ago. So this is not a fluky team. As they go forward, they're going to get better and better. And I think this could be a team that, believe it or not, could challenge the top of the conference as soon as next year. God knows it's not like there's much resistance, right? At least in the Big Ten. So you've got Ohio State there. You've got, can't see them losing. Oklahoma, can't see them losing. I just don't think Texas has it, the ability to beat them. And maybe Oklahoma will slip up, but Lincoln Riley does not seem like a guy This is not Bob Stoops. Oklahoma doesn't seem like the kind of team that slips up. He seems like a relentless taskmaster. That's my impression, that he will not allow that team. I mean, he will not allow to happen what Tom Herman allowed to have happen against Kansas last Saturday when they shouldn't have won that game. They escaped with a win over Kansas. That's not going to happen in some of the also-ran teams in the Big 12, in my opinion. So, and who knows, this could be the last run for Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. So then you look at Clemson, forget about it. They're going to run the table. So you've got those three teams, and Clemson's not going to be left out of the party. There's just no chance. No chance. And that's a whole nother subject that we can get into, how ridiculous the beauty contest that is the college football playoff. It remains a beauty contest, even though we have a playoff because we have so few teams. Then you've got, think about it, you've got Florida and Georgia right on one side in the SEC. Then you got LSU and Alabama on the other side. And essentially, the LSU-Alabama game more than likely is going to be a playoff for that fourth spot. And you're not going to see, unless Georgia, Florida beats Alabama or LSU, which I can't see that happening. Not right now. I mean, we've already saw what happened with LSU and Florida. And you just heard Ross saying, Florida, Ross Dellinger of SI just said, Florida's got the best defense in the league? Really? Interesting. So I think that's what you're looking at right now. Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State, and I'm picking LSU over Alabama and LSU as that fourth team. And then, of course, LSU has to win the SEC title game. If those two teams, LSU, Alabama, whoever comes out of that game, loses to Georgia, Florida, you're going to get a Georgia or you're going to get a Florida getting that fourth spot. Will you then, and Ross brought this up, will you then get an LSU or Alabama? No, you won't. You will not. Because those teams, I mean, the only team that an LSU or an Alabama, if they go into the conference title game in the SEC and lose, Georgia, Florida, provided those teams don't lose another game before the SEC title game, that's going to be your fourth team in the playoff. Are we going to be looking at LSU and Alabama leapfrogging Ohio State, Oklahoma, Clemson? Can't see it. Unless Clemson really struggles in winning out in the ACC. I still can't see it. I just can't see it. So, but it's going to be fun to watch and follow. And speaking of, well, not fun, but we've been following this story involving a Major League Baseball umpire, Rob Drake. And I don't know if you saw, but because it really hasn't been covered that much, although it should be covered, that Rob Drake, a longtime umpire in the major leagues since 1999, a guy who has worked World Series and All-Star games, he tweeted out on his Twitter account, where you tweet things out, of course, Twitter account, on Tuesday, Major League Baseball umpire Rob Drake, according to Jeff Passan of ESPN, tweeted out, I want to get the specific tweet here, and I thought I had it right in front of me. Okay, let me just read Jeff's report. Drake, I'm quoting the report from Jeff Passan of ESPN.com. Drake tweeted late Tuesday that he planned to buy an AR-15 rifle, quote, because if you impeach my president this way, you will have another civil war. Hashtag MAGA 2020. So the tweet went out that Rob Drake, Major League Baseball umpire, said that he is going to buy an AR-15 rifle and you will have another civil war. Those are the key statements in that tweet. All right. That he's going to buy an AR-15 rifle and you will have another civil war. Forget about the MAGA 2020. Forget about the Trump reference. That doesn't matter. All right. That's a terroristic threat or a terrorist threat. And no one else is pointing this out. But as we contemplate the future of Rob Drake, which I've heard a little bit of talk about, on sports radio, almost nothing on television. What is his future? Well, his future should be not being an umpire in Major League Baseball. And I went and looked at the laws that covered this kind of a situation. I'm going to get to that coming up. We're going to tell you about the situation involving legal as far as this tweet is concerned. And it was what he did against the law in the state of Arizona. And from what I can tell, I'm going to read you the laws as I understand them as they apply to this situation. We're just going to read the laws and you can decide. But we're going to apply that. And we'll do that after we talk to Bram Weinstein out in D.C. He's with ESPN 630, Sports Capital, talk show host, and, of course, longtime former ESPN Sports Center anchor. Had him on the show before. Happy to have him now. This is the time to talk to somebody out in D.C. Bram, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for dropping in.
Hey, Brooks, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you? All right. Are you feeling all right? What's going on in D.C.?
I like something otherworldly body has taken over the baseball team and made them unbeatable. And they're sophomoric and weird and fun. And it's completely, literally taken over the city. You said like take it over. Multiple times I've walked down the street. Everyone's got Nationals gear on right now. And they're walking by you and they're doing the baby shark thing to one another. Like as you like walk down the street to one another. So it's like it's taken over. It's a complete repeat of a couple of years ago. The Caps kind of took over the city. This one was really, I don't know why it was unexpected, but it was a little bit unexpected. They did not, because of the start, even though they played 700 ball down in the summer, by barely getting into the playoffs and just sneaking through the wild card, no one really saw this coming, and it's just kind of captured everybody.
So having done talk shows in different markets over the years, I'm guessing here, but as big as it's become, and again, this is a total guess, no idea, but you do a weekday talk show, of course, on ESPN 630 in DC, and as excited as everybody might be about this extraordinary situation playing out, when you're taking calls or you're looking at the phone lines or you're contemplating what you're going to talk about, is it still Redskins?
Yes. Actually, yes. Like actually, like the interesting part of it is this, like, and I think the Redskins owe the Nationals an edible arrangement or something, bare minimum, providing unbelievable cover for them for the last 3 weeks. Largely like the majority of our shows on the Nationals. I mean, because this is first time they're having the first World Series game here since 1933. First time for this franchise, not unlike the Capitals. They've been there a million times. They found interesting ways to lose in the playoffs. They were losing games at home in decisive games. So this is all really fun and exciting, and everyone's kind of caught up in the whole thing. The Redskins still are number one around here, and Bruce Allen is so lucky that they're doing what they're doing when he's saying things like, we have a damn good culture, when they're firing their coach and 1-5 and have scored 10 points in 3 weeks and that type of stuff, and can't play their rookie quarterback when everyone else is playing their rookie quarterback. They're an abomination, and they've had unbelievable cover here for the last few weeks, an unusual amount of cover because of what's happening. But yeah, like today's the most bizarre day ever, and it's the ultimate test case. They're playing Kirk Cousins tonight, so that would be 3 hours, right?
Right.
It wouldn't matter what else is going on in the world. That would be it tonight, and it's not going to be for good reason.
Visiting with Bram Weinstein in Washington, D.C. He's with the Sports Capital, ESPN 630 in Washington. And before we do get into the Redskins, because I do want to ask you about that situation, let's talk briefly about what your thoughts are on the Nationals. I had Jim Callis on from MLB Network earlier on the show, and we talked about, who we're picking, what we're thinking about with this series. And my thought is, and I hate to say this, but if there was ever a situation where we could see a complete reversal, this might be it. But I mean, what are you thinking?
I don't know. They seem to have some kind of, I know the Astros were built on an algorithm, and, Nationals have kind of started to go in that. The reason why Dusty Baker isn't here is because he didn't believe in that analytic stuff, and Davey Martinez bought into all this stuff. And so there's been a mesh of all of that. But what has happened here is the thing that remains unquantifiable and the thing that we can't define. And I think the reason why we like sports, it's there are guys doing things you wouldn't expect at the craziest moments. As Dribble Cabrera's coming through with hits, Kirk Suzuki's hitting would be a game-winning home run. It's not even the guys that you would expect to do this. And Juan Soto's 20. Right? I don't care how good he is. He's 20 years old, and every single night, they're idiots for throwing a pitch to him at this point. And with Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg going at least once more each, and if necessary, a second time for either Scherzer or Strasburg when they make that decision, if it gets to that, I got a hard time buying they're losing. I bought into if Scherzer can somehow beat Cole game one, and it certainly, didn't manifest the way we thought it would, that they'd have a legitimate shot to do this. We just didn't expect it to happen because Cole hadn't lost since 2013 or whatever the timeline was. Now, because they have this advantage and because of their staff, I just have a hard time buying that those guys are going to get beat 4 times. I think they have the advantage now. Visiting
with Bram Weinstein in D.C., I want to talk to you now about the Redskins and the Vikings. Obviously an interesting matchup when you got Kirk Cousins, and Cousins playing much better, but not playing at 1 o'clock this week on a Sunday, which usually means good things aren't going to happen for the Vikings. But of course, playing the Redskins, it looks like there might be good things happening for the Vikings coming up tonight. But what about the quarterback situation? Why is Haskins not playing? I mean, what's your read on it? Is this a guy? Should he be playing? What's the bottom line on it?
I mean, of course he should be playing. And they have had this is the one thing the organization has been clear about that they've been on the same page about, because Jay Gruden was saying this very early, and even Bruce Allen said it, and he's not open. He doesn't speak to the public that often really about anything. And Bill Callahan, Kevin O'Connell, the offensive coordinator, and Jay Gruden, the fired coach, all said he wasn't ready to go. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. But I look at their record and how their offense is performing, and all of us around here are going, yeah, but Gardner Minshew's playing, and Kyler Murray can play, and the Steelers won a road game with some guy they found off the street. So you're telling me the guy that was your first-round pick is, quote-unquote, not ready to go, and this is coming from the expertise of the 1-6 team telling me that he can't play and he can't go in an offense that doesn't work. And so the fans here are fed up. They want to know what in the world is going on. They don't see how it could be any worse by playing him. And truthfully, as they are in the search of a new coach, and that's probably already begun to a certain degree, I would think that the new coach wants to see this guy play before he walks into the complete unknown of who is this person and whether they're going to pull a Josh Rosen and go pick a quarterback near the top of the draft because they feel like he's a bust. Let me just put it this way. The red flags are way, way, way up because he's not playing, and that's on them for not putting him out there and not trusting that he has at least football instincts to play. It's why they picked him in the first round. So something's off here. No one's saying what the truth is. Nobody wants to be, no one wants to say they definitively made a mistake and they're going to go a different direction. And they'll say things like Pat Mahomes didn't play his first year. Aaron Rodgers didn't play his first year. But this team's terrible. Their offense is worse than terrible, and they're still not playing him. That doesn't really add up. So there's a reason for that. And we're trying to get to the bottom of it. And we assume, because they're playing Minnesota and Buffalo, so that's 2 more losses here that are coming, that at some point they just have to play them for the sake of playing them.
And of course, for the Redskins, you can never really definitively say it can't get any worse than blank because, well, there's Trent Williams there. What's going to happen with Trent Williams? Is Bruce Allen going to come off this obstinance, as we get to the trading deadline? What do you expect to happen? And we're going to let you go here because I know you got to run.
We don't think he's going to trade him. He has said he won't. He has said on the record that he's going to play for the Redskins. Trent Williams has said nothing actually on record to anybody. He hasn't confirmed or denied any of this stuff, but we all do believe that it is more than just a contract, that he's doesn't trust the front office over medical issues. There's a lot of stuff that I don't have time to get into. And some of the things that he's complaining about that he was treated for would never have been treated by a training staff. So that's what's kind of odd about it too. He had a cyst on the back of his head. A football training staff would never perform that surgery. He would go to a specialist. So for him to be upset actually at the Redskins over that is kind of off and strange. And maybe they didn't treat it wisely last year during the season. I don't know. Find out when he talks. I don't expect them to trade him because for some reason, some of these things become these personal grudges for the president of the organization. And it doesn't make any sense. The reason why Kirk Cousins is in Minnesota is because the president called him Kurt and tried to lowball him with an offer and then made life for him miserable here. And then Cousins played out the string contractually through the CBA and played the franchise game until he got what he wanted to get out and be extricated. And the Redskins got nothing for that. And the same thing is going to happen here. Williams obviously isn't going to play for them. And for some reason, they won't answer the phone, and it feels personal and has nothing to do with a valuable asset that could get something for a team that is literally going nowhere. And he's 31. He hasn't played 16 games in multiple years. I don't know why you wouldn't be trading him anyway, since you're in a rebuild.
Wow. Thanks so much. Enjoy that cart flag, by the way, that Nationals car flag that I know you've got on your car now, right? Flying it around. And we'll talk to you soon. I really appreciate it, Bram.
See you.
That's Bram Weinstein of Sports Radio, ESPN 630, the sports capital in D.C., giving us a little flavor, a little color of what's going on with the Redskins and the Vikings coming up. Of course, if we're talking about the Redskins, we're not talking about what's going on the field. No. It's got to be Bruce Allen. It's got to be Trent Williams. It's got to be why is Haskins not playing? It is nonsensical. It is personal. And I mean, they should have the pitchforks and torches out in D.C. The fact that they don't is the reason why Bruce Allen is still in a position of power. It's really a function of the media soft pedaling that situation. So coming up, we're going to talk to Darren Heitner. He's the author, or one of the authors, who drafted the bill in Florida, which may be enacted into law next summer, 2020, where college athletes in the state of Florida are going to get paid for endorsements, right? Republican governor of Florida just came out and endorsed it. That's a big deal because it didn't look like it was going to get through the Florida legislature. Nobody's talking about this. We're the only ones. Literally. But, and of course, that's not a coincidence, because our bread isn't buttered based on live game rights. That's not our business model. Our business model is entertaining you every single day in a wonderful community that we have here at Fancred. Mobile streaming at its best. Every weekday from noon to about 2 o'clock Eastern time. Every single weekday. Let me get my finger in the middle of this screen. Every single weekday. Beginning at noon Eastern time. And so I did want to get into, and it's something that I left off on before Bram joined us, and I'm going to have some time to do it here now. And I also want to address the situation with Sports Illustrated, which we really haven't looked at yet. If we don't get to it completely today, we're definitely going to look at it tomorrow. But I want to revisit the situation with the Major League Baseball umpire, because I want you to have the information on this story you're not going to get anywhere else. And that is, so Rob Drake, this Major League Baseball umpire, tweeted that he was going to buy an AR-15 rifle. This is part of a tweet on his Twitter account, which is now deleted. And I'm going to buy an AR-15 rifle because if you impeach my president this way, you will have another civil war. MAGA 2020 is the hashtag. I'm not making this up. It really bizarre. Major League Baseball umpire for 20 years. He's umpired in the postseason and the All-Star game. And that's what he's spelling civil war with an A, CIVAL, right? I mean, it's like, this isn't real, right? This is some sort of parody account, right? Surely it is. No, it's not. It's the real thing. And this happened just a couple of days ago. Major League Baseball is, they're aware of it. They're investigating. And so if you go through Google and Rob Drake and his Twitter account, of course, there's people who have been able to snag some of the archive tweets, some of the things that he's retweeted and liked. And, so much of it is based on politics and which way he leans. And I'm here to tell you that doesn't mean a damn thing to me. I don't care about the politics stuff. He could be saying that stuff about Joe Biden or Obama. It's irrelevant. What matters is the guy made a terrorist threat on Twitter knowingly by saying, I'm going to buy an AR-15 rifle. You will have another civil war. Right? And he lives in Arizona. And as I put on my Twitter account, I looked up the applicable laws in this situation. And there actually is an applicable law. Let me find it here. Let me get the exact lowdown on it. All right. This is from the state of Arizona website, and it's statute 13-2308.02, making a terrorist threat. All right. So this statute is on the Arizona government website, azleg.gov. All right. Making a terrorist threat, statute 13-2308.02. And it's linked on my Twitter account. And the first part of the statute reads, it is unlawful for a person to threaten, to commit an act of terrorism, or communicate the threat to any other person. Let me read that again. It is unlawful for a person to threaten to commit an act of terrorism and communicate the threat to any other person. That's part A of the law. This is Arizona state law, and this is the state in which the umpire in question, Rob Drake, resides. Part C of the law. It is not a defense to a prosecution under this section that the person did not have the intent or capability of committing the act of terrorism. One more time. It is not a defense to prosecution under this section that the person did not have the intent or capability of committing the act of terrorism. That's part of the statute. Now, let's go back. What was the tweet again? The tweet was, I'm going to buy an AR-15 rifle because if you impeach my president this way, you will have another civil war. MAGA 2020 hashtag. Okay. So he's going to buy an AR-15 rifle and then you will have another civil war. Right? That's a terrorist threat, period. In my opinion. This is my opinion, right? So if this law is indeed violated, it is a class 3 felony, and that carries with it a minimum sentence of 3.5 years, 3.5 years, and a maximum of 9 years, right? So that's where we are. We're not, here's where we aren't. What should we do? Should we suspend him? What? Suspend him? What are you talking about? I'm going to buy an AR-15 rifle and you will have another civil war. Right? We're talking about a suspension. You know, look, I mean, we don't have to go there, but this guy is in a situation where he's umpiring World Series games, All-Star games, that kind of responsibility. Think about a home plate umpire in that situation. Integrity, credibility, whatever it may be. And he's tweeting that out. And he knows that's social media. Social. This isn't his buddy at where he's having lunch, you know, Chipotle with. That where he's giving these opinions or whatever, or making these. It's not really an opinion. It's a statement. It's a threat. And in my opinion, it violates a statute in Arizona, and it's a class 3 felony. So that's where I am on it. And somehow nobody's talking about this. Very little. Now, it was on the front page of ESPN.com for a while last night, but now it's been buried. Right? I understand we had a World Series. We've got other ugly things going on in relation to the World Series that I want to get to before we talk to Darren Heitner. And you've probably seen this story if you're on Twitter, which you may or may not have discovered Fancred and Sports by Brooks on Fancred through Twitter and through my Twitter account. But in case you haven't, a situation played out last Saturday after the Astros clinched the NLCS, right, where they won their way into the World Series last Saturday. And it involved a relief pitcher for the Houston Astros who had in the past been charged with domestic abuse, domestic violence, charges that were later dropped. Closer Roberto Osuna. And let's see. I want to read this. So what I want to do is, what ended up happening was Osuna, of course, has this background of being an accused, allegedly assaulted a woman who was the mother of his then 3-year-old child. I want to kind of read this to you to make sure I have the details down. All right. So Osuna pitches for Houston. All right. And he only pitches for the Astros these days because he allegedly assaulted Alejandra Roman Cota, the mother of his then 3-year-old child, in May 2018 as a member of the Blue Jays. Prosecutors dropped the charges after Cota returned to Mexico and declined to testify. So the assault took place in the United States, and she returned to Mexico, declined to testify. And as part of the bargain, Osuna agreed not to have contact with her for 1 year. He was suspended 75 games. And Osuna, at that time, one of the best closers in the game. His infraction made him, in the mind of the Astros front office, a distressed asset, and they traded for him, right? So the Astros trade for a guy who obviously has a taint, has a stink on him. Pretty suspicious. Alleged to have assaulted his partner, mother of his 3-year-old child. She goes back to Mexico, doesn't press charges, right? And the Astros trade for him, and they get him for the postseason, 75-game suspension. Now he's pitching for the Astros. After he blows the save in the clinching game Saturday, right? After that game, assistant general manager for the Astros, Brandon Taubman, starts directing what were yells as he was yelling in the direction of 3 female reporters in the locker room, right in the vicinity of Osuna. After Osuna has pitched in this clinching game on Saturday, the assistant GM, Brandon Taubman, turned to a group of 3 female reporters, including one female reporter who was wearing a purple domestic violence awareness bracelet, and he yelled half a dozen times, "Thank God we got Osuna. I'm so effing glad we didn't say effing. I'm so glad we effing got Osuna," right? He said that a half a dozen times in the direction of 3 female reporters, one of whom was wearing a purple domestic violence awareness bracelet, right? That's what took place. So can we, I think we have enough time here. Can we put up the statement? Cam Smith, our producer here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Cam, is it possible to put the statement up that was the response of the Astros? I want to put the statement up on the screen for you. After this took place, a reporter for Sports Illustrated wrote a story detailing what happened. And this was the, saying that this assistant GM for the Astros had yelled that 6 different times or half dozen times, "I'm so effing glad we signed Osuna," right? Thank God we got Osuna. Driving that point home, an accused domestic abuse actor, Roberto Osuna. And so here is, as we put it up on the screen, the statement from Sports Illustrated the Astros, after Sports Illustrated published a story detailing what happened. Now, this came out on Twitter, and you can see, just look at the spaces, by the way, after the word posted and after the period, after irresponsible. Clearly, there was some contemplation going on here when the Astros sent this statement out. but the story posted by Sports Illustrated is misleading and completely irresponsible. An Astros player was being asked questions about a difficult outing. Our executive was supporting the player during a difficult time. His comments had everything to do with about the game situation. This is Taubman's comments that just occurred and nothing else. They were also not directed toward any specific reporter. We are extremely disappointed in Sports Illustrated's attempt to fabricate a story where one does not exist. Right now, interesting part of that statement is had everything to do about the game situation. So Taubman's comments were about the game situation, and his comments were, "Thank God we got Osuna. I'm so effing glad we got Osuna." This is the guy that had just blown a save. And they had actually won the National League Championship Series despite him. Right? So right there, there's something that doesn't smell right. And so after that statement, there's an uproar on Twitter, justifiably so, in part because there were male witnesses, media members, including Hunter Atkins, who covers the Astros for the Houston Chronicle. He spoke up on Twitter and said, "I saw what happened, and the way it was described in the Sports Illustrated article is how it happened." Of course, it takes men to jump in and give credibility to the story, right? And debunk SI's ridiculous, I should say, I keep saying that, Astros' ridiculous statement, allegation against SI that story was somehow fabricated, right? So, shortly thereafter, the Astros, you talk about backtracking, we get this statement from Taubman himself. And the tone is quite different, but not exactly an apology. Here's what was in his statement. Quote, "This past Saturday, during our clubhouse celebration, I used inappropriate language for which I am deeply sorry and embarrassed. In retrospect, I realized that my comments were unprofessional and inappropriate." Really, they were inappropriate. My over exuberance in support of a player has been misrepresented as a demonstration of a regressive attitude about an important social issue. Those that know me know I am a progressive member of the community and a loving and committed husband and father. I hope that those who do know me understand that the Sports Illustrated article does not reflect who I am or my values. I am sorry. Here's the key point. Here we finally get to it. And here it is. I'm sorry, but I'm only sorry. He didn't write it this way. Let me just read it. This is the last line, the last sentence of the statement. I am sorry if anyone was offended by my actions. I am sorry if anyone was offended by my, that's not, you've seen that Reese's commercial. Not sorry. Not sorry. Back off the mic on that. Not sorry. He's not sorry. That's not an apology. Not even close. This guy, why does he have a job? Look, boy, you hate to do it. You hate to call for someone to be let go. But, and this is much bigger than Brandon Taubman. But at some point, something needs to be done when it comes to the maltreatment of women. This stems from an allegation of domestic abuse, which, of course, wasn't carried through. The woman who was involved went back to Mexico, right? But perhaps if she knew that this sort of thing wouldn't be taking place, she may have stuck around and held Osuna accountable. Of course, he wouldn't have ended up with Houston in the first place. But the chances of Osuna reoffending, maybe next time in Mexico, if it were to happen, might not be as likely. I mean, that's the whole issue here. And God knows it's at epidemic levels, not only in our society, but in football, in the NFL, in college. It's enabled Major League Baseball. This is disgusting. This is just gross. That this guy, here's the thing. He's just a guy. He's the assistant GM. That's first. That shouldn't even be a consideration. Doesn't matter who it is. Understand that? But at the very least, he's just a guy. Who cares? He's got a job today? Well, why does he have a job? Well, let's listen to a statement by the Astros general manager on a Houston sports radio station yesterday. Quote, Brandon has apologized for inappropriate behavior. And first of all, it was inappropriate. Essentially, let me finish this. Inappropriate behavior. And I think, from my perspective, clearly something happened that he regrets. We're not sure what it is. And I'm sorry if someone was offended. No. And I think, from my perspective, clearly something happened that he regrets. What we really don't know is the intent behind the inappropriate comments he made. This makes me sick. We may never know that, because the person who said them and the people who heard them, at least up to this point, have different perspectives. They do, really. Is that why he released that statement? And what of the first statement? And who was responsible for the first statement? And where would they have gotten that idea, the Astros? Where would they have gotten the idea to put that out there if it didn't come from Taubman? That this was fabricated, this was made up, that this didn't happen. That's number one, that it didn't even happen. All right? It was fabricated. Remember? We had it up on the screen. It was made up. Right? Then there's an acknowledgement. That it happened, that he did yell and scream these things in the direction of a woman who was wearing a purple bracelet, indicating, her observance of domestic abuse, right? Signifying her observance of that as a fact of life. And now he wants to tell us that's not who he is, even though what he's doing is not who he is. And he's not apologizing for it. But hey, look, if you're unhappy, upset about it, I mean, look, if you're unhappy or upset that it took me so long to turn left in that intersection, I'm sorry. Is that an apology? No, it's not. It's the same damn thing. I'm sorry that I didn't turn right on that red light fast enough for you, right? And if you were pissed off at me doing that, I'm sorry that you were offended and unhappy. Right? Does that sound like an apology? That's the same thing. It's BS. So we actually have a video that we'll play. We may not get to it today. We got an interview coming up here in a second. If Darren is going to join us, Cam Smith, our producer, Darren Heitner, attorney in Florida, who helped to draft the legislation in the Florida legislature that may lead to college athletes getting paid for their name, image, or likeness. If he's going to be joining us, we may move this to tomorrow as we continue to look at this subject, because it's very important. But we have some video of the author of the article that was allegedly fabricated, according to the Astros, that we'll bring to you, get a chance to get an even deeper perspective and understanding of what took place involving the Astros and Sports Illustrated. So let's bring up Darren Heitner now first, who's in Florida right now and who reported what I think is huge news today involving the future of college athletics, college football, college basketball. When you get the opportunity, Cam, you can go ahead and put him up, and we will visit with Darren Heitner, who we've talked with before as a guy who helped to draft this legislation for the Florida legislature that could indeed lead to athletes getting paid for endorsements involving their name, image, or likeness. And this is a law that could be, if enacted, much different than what we have in California, namely in the time frame. how quickly is it going to be enacted into law? How quickly will we start to see action? Will we start to see athletes starting to get paid? Well, we've got litigation too, and I want to ask Darren about that when we visit with him here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, with you every single weekday, beginning at noon Eastern time. And that does include tomorrow. Hope you join us. We'll be talking a lot of NBA tomorrow. And we'll look ahead to the weekend, college football, the NFL, and particularly college football, what we're talking about today in terms of the possible law that could be enacted in the Florida State Legislature. This could have a ground shatter or earth shattering effect on the sport of college football. So we'll visit with someone who is intimately and directly involved in that possibility, and something that could set off, I think, a chain reaction throughout the United States. Darren Heitner now joins us. Darren, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for jumping on short notice.
Not a problem. How are you, Brooks?
I'm doing great. And man, I remember talking about your situation it wasn't with you, it was with somebody else, but we were speculating about the situation in the Florida legislature and the prospect of this amazing thing that you guys have done in drafting this legislation that could go into effect as soon as next summer. But I was cautioned by at least one person, and I think it was on this show, who indicated that it might not get through the legislature. And it sounds like we have a major development today that might impact that situation. What's happened?
Yeah, and look, from the outside looking in, for the casual observer, I think that was probably a fair assessment, that the odds were stacked against the Florida legislature, and in particular, the governor of Florida supporting an action like this. It seemed to provide athletes the ability to utilize and commercialize their name, image, and likenesses, a somewhat of a liberal proposal. And so when you look at a state of Florida that has conservatives running Congress as well as the office of governor, I think it's fair for someone to make that assumption. However, we have been in close conversation with the governor's office for some time now, and we even have a sponsor in the Senate already. We proposed the bill in the House about a month ago. And so today is huge for us because finally we can come out and talk to the world about the fact that we have the governor's support broadly on this particular issue. Surely between now and the time that the bill is put on the floor of the House and ultimately the Senate, and eventually in front of the governor, hopefully for execution, we're going to be having discussions as to whether or not modifications need to be made here or there in order to get a piece of legislation that makes everybody in the state, or at least as many people as possible, comfortable with the legislation. But today was a huge step because, at least in theory, the governor is coming out and saying, I am in support of this piece of legislation. And so you have a state like Florida, which in my mind is the biggest state when it comes to college, certainly athletes that are rising up the ranks in high school and below, taking a very bold stance.
Outside of the first of all, when it comes to the legislature, when it comes to vote counting, right? I mean, where do you think it stands right now?
It's hard to tell because Congress isn't currently in session, but we have been talking not only to the governor's office, but many other members of the House and certainly of the Senate, at least when we were looking at having a sponsor in the Senate. And it appears that there is broad support. Again, I think that certain individuals had their concerns here and there about either particular language or the unintended consequences that may arise from passing this legislation and enacting it into law. But overall, again, I think in theory, most people are actually in support of it. And so it'll be a matter of now utilizing the next 6 to 8 months to figure out what is the best piece of legislation. We have what I believe to be nice boilerplate legislation that's been pushed forward in the form of roughly 6 pages. It's a bit nuanced from what's been proposed in California, which, as you know, would not be enacted until 2023 anyhow. But yeah, I do believe that we'll have the requisite support to put it in front of the governor, and at least based on what we've heard today, it's something the governor's looking to sign.
What is the basis of support for this bill from the perspective of the Republicans or people in general that are for it in the state of Florida? Because it varies from state to state, party to party.
That's a great question. And so the House of Representatives member Chip Lamarca, who I teamed up with in just initially drafting the legislation and proposing it, he is a Republican. And one thing that we discussed was the concept of providing the free market, providing the opportunity for every individual, no matter whether you are a college athlete or otherwise, to be able to commercialize your ability to make money in a legitimate enterprise. And certainly every other person has the opportunity to exploit his or her name, image, and likeness for commercial gain. I think from that perspective alone, there's no challenges. No one has come out and said that people should not have that right. It's just a matter of whether college athletes should have that right. And so from the Republican standpoint, from the conservative standpoint, this really isn't an issue for discussion. If others should have this free market economy where, again, the market will dictate what individuals are able to get, then so should college athletes. And that's one thing that's pretty important about our position. We're not trying to place limitations on what the college athletes are able to secure in the form of commercializing their publicity rights. So we're not going to say you're capped at $500,000. It's what the market will allow for.
Outside of and we're visiting with Darren Heitner, who helped to author this legislation in the state of Florida that may be enacted as soon as next summer, if it's enacted and passed into law in the state, that would allow college athletes to benefit financially from their name, image, or likeness. Outside of the legislature, what sort of resistance have you already started to feel, whether it's lobbying efforts, institutions, individuals that are trying to hold this up?
So interestingly, we haven't heard much from the NCAA. We have spoken to various athletic department ADs, athletic directors in the state of Florida, but even outside of our state borders to kind of see what their thoughts are. And again, what we're trying to do is really understand what the concerns are and potentially make changes before it is put on the floor of the House of Representatives, ultimately the Senate, and then hopefully ultimately the governor's office. It's interesting that we've spoken to quite a few coaches in the state of Florida who are not at all against this. In fact, they believe either from a normative standpoint that it's something that the athletes should be able to exploit, and or they do believe that it will provide them some sort of competitive advantage because they'll be able to then show to future recruits that their college athletes were given this opportunity, whether or not they benefited from it, just having the opportunity itself. But there are athletic directors that are certainly concerned. And really, I think it's primarily based on providing certain competitive advantage in the landscape.
Well, we talked to Patrick Ruby, who you may or may not know, but he published a newsletter recently, longtime journalist covering NCAA issues, who's a fellow at the communications school at the University of Texas. And in this newsletter, he talked to a couple of different attorneys who have litigated cases involving the NCAA, and their opinion is on this case that the schools that are out there, let's just say hypothetically, the University of Florida, if this is passed into law, may do something where you end up agreeing to the law if you're the schools, but then the minute it is applied, you decide to hold that quarterback, let's say for the Florida Gators, out in consideration of NCAA eligibility rules, and suddenly we end up in court again, and it's litigated over the next 4 or 5 years. What are your thoughts about the possibility of that taking place?
It's honestly not something that has been discussed whatsoever. I can't fathom that there will be a coach that holds a player out based on the player having the opportunity to exploit his or her name, image, or likeness.
But what about the school?
I don't see that happening. I really don't. Now, I think that presents additional issues because if the school feels forced to hold out a player, ultimately that is emanating from the NCAA. And I think it then could potentially become some sort of antitrust issue where certainly the player who's been negatively impacted would have standing to take action. Particularly if we're talking about a very notable athlete who's been labeled a blue chip or otherwise. So I think the risk of doing that exceeds the risk that the school would have with regard to some sort of punitive measure that the NCAA would take.
What are the immediate steps now you guys are taking going forward to try to get this thing into law as quickly as possible?
Well, going through committees right now at the tail end of 2019 in Florida, and so Chip LaMarca will be speaking with many individuals in the House of Representatives and the Senate to gauge their level of interest or concern with regard to the legislation as currently proposed. We are speaking with numerous other individuals, whether they be experts in this particular area, many college professors throughout the state and outside of that. We're trying to gather as much information as possible from individuals who are reputable in the space, because truly it's in essence imperfect, because we have to still rely on the NCAA rules and regulations, and we don't want to go too far to step on the toes of the NCAA outside of this small capacity that we're trying to allow players the same rights as everyone else. So in the immediate future, we're talking to a lot of individuals to make sure that this is the piece of legislation that we want to push forward and put on the floor in the beginning of 2020. And as you mentioned, it's a pretty fast track from there, because ultimately we're trying to enact it by May 2020.
Of course, the media plays a huge role in disseminating college sports to the masses. What's your impression of the response so far with the media, and could the media be an impediment in this situation?
The media can always be an impediment, but I don't think that that's the role that the media is playing thus far. I think the media has been very helpful in getting the message out. I believe that the media has done a very good job of not only questioning what we're doing, but also asking questions to coaches. For instance, I know Dennis Dodd of CBS talked to Dan Mullen at the University of Florida and was able to ask him questions about what he thinks on the issue and how he'll be able to potentially utilize it, or if there are any detriments. So I think it adds some needed exposure to the issue so that the casual fan has a better appreciation of what we're actually trying to do. But, for instance, there was, I think Peter Burns of ESPN today tweeted me with a bunch of questions surrounding the legislation. And I appreciate that. I want those questions to be asked by the media so that we can respond to them, as opposed to the media making their own assumptions and publishing it. So I've actually been pleasantly surprised by the media thus far.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the media could potentially play a major role, but you kind of wonder because, of course, financially they're in bed with college athletics, to say the least, college football, college basketball, and that lends to the status quo. So, but it is an encouraging sign. I can't thank you enough for you taking the time to keep us updated, and we're going to keep following this story because I think this could really be a groundbreaking situation. The last thing I want to ask you is, based on your impressions so far, if Florida was to enact this law, how quickly, if at all, do you think a similar process would start to take place or in other states?
Well, I think we're already seeing it. Certainly California 2023. I don't know if they would be at all interested in modifying their effective date. New York, South Carolina, Minnesota. I certainly expect, especially with today's news, that you'll find even more Republican states try to start to take this issue more seriously. And then you have Mark Walker in the federal Congress, who is certainly championing this issue. I believe he had Jay Billis on Capitol Hill this past week. So, potentially we even have some sort of more movement on the federal level. Remember, our goal is to benefit the college athletes. So ultimately, if the NCAA decides to voluntarily change its rules and regulations, maybe, we just fall back from a state and federal perspective, which is perfectly fine. But actions speak louder than words. And the NCAA has constantly said, we're looking into it. Until they actually do something, we're going to proceed.
Thanks so much for the time, Darren, and keep us posted.
Thank you.
That's Darren Heitner, attorney in Florida, and a big part of what is HB 287, post-secondary student athletes. Authorize certain students participating in intercollegiate athletics to receive specified compensation, provides requirements for specified students, post-secondary educational institutions, certain organizations, and specified representatives, and provides contract requirements. That's part of this HB 287 that's now being proposed in the Florida state legislature. Major development today that we're out front of and covering what could be a law that goes into effect July 1st, 2020, that would allow for athletes at the University of Florida, Miami, UCF, Florida State, all college athletes inside the borders of the state of Florida to benefit financially from their name, image, or likeness. And we just talked to a guy who essentially wrote the bill. This is not something that's just copied and pasted from the state of California's law. And of course, that law doesn't go into effect for 3 years, with the idea being, well, we'll give the NCAA time to change the rules. If the NCAA was going to change its rules, it would have done so by now. The NCAA has been in existence since the early 1950s and hasn't changed a damn thing. Nothing has changed. All right. Nothing is better. And it's not going to get better until we have people like Darren Heitner and Chip LaMarca, Republican representative out of Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, coming together with this sort of activity and this sort of action. And the media is not covering it because they're financially, for the most part, in bed with, the teams. They are bought off by the college conferences and not by the NCAA, because the NCAA is the conferences. It is the schools. Understand that there's no difference when you're assessing the NCAA, and the idea that, well, the schools are going to form this new organization and go around it. What? The schools are the NCAA, and the NCAA is covered. It is its sole cover not to pay players. Please. No such thing. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation that I hear all the time, as if the NCAA is this third party, disinterested. Nothing could be further from the truth, especially in basketball. So we're going to revisit this SI story, hopefully tomorrow if we get the opportunity, because I think it's an important story. We brought it up here earlier. The Astros, absurd conduct. And I just want to drill down, and I want to make sure that we document what's taken place there. It's important, especially in the context of the treatment of women. I'm really getting tired of it. I mean, I'm sure women are laughing when they hear me say something like, oh, yeah, this guy's just starting to get tired of it. Really? But this is an opportunity for the Astros to make a statement, to do something, to back up their words. And clearly they're not going to, because the leadership, we have people on the record now. Now we know how they are, and we understand why it happened in the first place and why it will continue to happen. It will, based on what's going on right now. And it's part of the media's job, my job, to put a spotlight on this, right? In the context, of course, inside sports. It's like this in society. I'm well aware. But this is a high-profile case. This is an opportunity to make a statement about it. And this is interesting stuff. And it affects the teams. It affects rosters, affects betting lines, affects everything going forward in organizations that we all care about. That's what we do every single day here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And so that's going to do it for today's show. But we've got a great show coming up tomorrow already. Some stellar guests that are coming tomorrow, and subjects and topics that matter to you that couldn't be more relevant. But we take the extra time to look deeper into these subjects with you and help you understand them and help you know about things before they take place. Oh, yeah. I remember what he was talking about that. That's the whole point of what we're doing here. It's a different show. Everybody says that, but nobody delivers. We deliver. So we'll be back here tomorrow. And I'm live in Los Angeles every weekday, Monday through Friday, beginning at noon Eastern time. Tell everybody you know. Get that Fancred app on their phone, tablet, at home, on the phone, wherever you are. You got it in your pocket. Noon. Oh, Brooks is on. There we go. What's he got going today? Right? That's what we're on. That's why we're here. So that's going to do it for today's show. I'm Brooks Melchior, live from Los Angeles for our producer, Cam Smith in Boston. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.